In this week's In-Ear Insights, it is the AI wars. Katie, you had some thoughts and some observations about the most recent things going on with Anthropic, with OpenAI, with Google, XAI, and stuff like that. So set the table. What's going on?
Well, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds about the whole, reasons why people are jumping ship on OpenAI and moving towards cloud. Like that's in the news, it's political. You can catch up on that. But the short version is that decisions from the top from each of these companies have been made that people either agree with or don't agree with in terms of their own values of their company, their own personal values. And what we're seeing, unsurprisingly, is that when publicly traded companies make unpopular decisions that don't align with the majority of their user base, people jump ship. They were like, okay, I don't want to use you in it. We've seen it with Target. We've seen it with a lot of other companies who have made decisions that people don't feel align with their own personal values. And so what we're seeing now is people are, for lack of a better term, abandoning OpenAI and signing on to Anthropic's Claude. So that's what I wanted to chat about today because this is something we talk about a lot, which is business continuity, risk management. What happens when you get too closely tied in to one particular piece of software and something goes wrong? We've talked about this on past episodes, and we always talked about it in the theoretical because up until now, for the most part, software has outages, things happen, but it generally tends to come back. You don't often, I guess more, you do so more now these days, but you don't often see a mass exodus of a very popular, prominent piece of software that people have started to build their entire businesses around. So, before we get into like, what does this mean for the end user? Like, what are the possible solutions? Chris, I would like to get your thoughts, maybe your cat's thoughts on what's going on.
One of the things that we've said from very early on in the AI space, because it changes so rapidly, is that it is generally a bad idea to have brand loyalty in the space of any vendor because the technology changes so fast. If you were, a hater of Google Bard for good reason, Bard was a terrible model. You said, I'm never going to touch another Google product again, you would have missed out on Gemini and Gemini 3 and 3.1, which is currently the top state of the art model. If you were all in on Claude, when Claude 2.1 came out and then 2.5 came out and it was terrible, you would have missed out on the current generation of Opus 4.6 and so on and so forth. And so two things that come to mind. One, brand loyalty in this space is very dangerous. It is in the tech space in general. Not to get too political, but let's just say that the tech companies do not care about you, right? So there's no reason to give them your loyalty. And second, particularly as people are starting to build in agentic AI and stuff like that, you should be thinking about what are called abstraction layers. This is a concept from the very earliest days of computing where you would say, we never want to code against a model or an operating system or anything directly. Instead, we want to have an abstraction layer that separates our code from the machinery, kind of like there's an engine compartment in your car, and you should be able to put in a new engine without having to rip apart the entire car. And if you do that well, when you're building things like AI agents, then when a new model comes along, regardless of political circumstances, regardless of the news headlines, when something better comes along, if you are committed to delivering the highest quality product to your customer, you should be able to pull the old engine out, put a new engine in, and be off to the races.
I don't disagree with that, but that is not something that's accessible to everybody, especially smaller businesses who have looked at these softwares like OpenAI, like Google's Gemini, as solutions that they have been desperately needing. So, we've talked about Claude and Cowork, which is part of their desktop application, and how much we've been relying on it. And it sort of struck me over the weekend as I was seeing things happen in the news how reliant I've become on it just in the past 2 weeks. And if it were to stop working, what does that mean for the work that I've been trying to move forward? And that to me is a huge concern because I don't necessarily have the coding skills or the resources, the physical human resources to replicate right now what I've been doing in cowork. And that's why I've been doing it in cowork, is because we are limited on resources. But cowork has advanced to the point where I'm able to replicate good enough what I would need if I hired a team of designers and, web developers and, marketing strategists or whatever it is that it's doing for me. And so it definitely sort of, it shook me to my core a little bit of like, this could also go away. So what does that mean for me, the end user, for me, the business owner who is now, in the middle of multiple projects? And if I can't access them. So this morning, Claude had an outage, unsurprisingly, because so the outage, if you were able to get the message, is basically the servers are overloaded and too many people are trying to access it because they're stepping away from OpenAI and moving into Claude. Claude came out over the weekend, and I took a screenshot of this ad so I wouldn't forget. Claude put out switch to Claude without starting over. Bring your preferences and context from other AI providers to Claude. With one copy paste, Claude updates its memory and picks up right where you left off. Memory is available on all paid plans. And so for a lot of people, the ability to switch from one large language model to another felt like there was a barrier because everything they had built inside of OpenAI, for example, they couldn't transfer it over. And Claude was like, nope, you can do it. So that opened the floodgates of people who were like, great, I'm getting rid of this, I'm moving over here. And their servers were overloaded. And people who had been using the system regularly before this whole panic switch happened were like, what do you mean I can't get the work done that I planned on doing at 7 o'clock this morning when it's quiet?
So there's two different answers there, depending on who you are. For you specifically, Katie, as the CEO and my business partner, I would just come over to your house and say, okay, you're going to learn Claude Code. You're going to install the terminal application, and I'm going to install Claude Code Router, which allows you to switch to any model of any provider, so that you can continue getting your work done. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, I can't do that with everybody who in our community.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not a scalable option. And I think that's the point.
Right. However, my suggestion there for other folks is it's not as well. That's not true. It is as robust, but slightly harder to do. But almost every major company has an environment that you can install, a non-code environment that can provide at least some of those capabilities. So Google's is called Anti-Gravity. OpenAI's is called Codex. Alibaba's you can use within tools like Client or Kilo. So there are, if you were used to these agentic workflows, as long as, and this is the important part, as long as you have backed up your prompts and your workflows, you can move them into other systems relatively painlessly. So, for example, Google's Anti-Gravity supports the skills format. So if you've built these great skills like the co-CEO, you can bring co-CEO into Anti-Gravity. So it's not, and maybe this is something that we need to do as a company for our community. It's not obvious, but you can port from one system to another relatively quickly.
And that brings us to sort of where I wanted to hit upon today, is that software fails. It's just code. Excuse me. So what is your backup plan if the system that you're heavily reliant on goes away? And again, we've always sort of hypothetically said, oh, if it goes away, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? We're here. We are at that point. So not only are people leaving a major software provider, they are, also struggling with those switching costs. They're struggling with bringing their stuff over because everything lives within the system. A lot of people are just building and not documenting. And that's a problem.
It is a problem. And again, this is where, if you've been in the space for a while and you understand the technology behind it, backups, fallback systems now have gotten incredibly good. So about a month ago now, Alibaba Quen released Quen 3.5, which is in a variety of sizes. I was posting about it not too long ago on LinkedIn. The version that can run on a nice MacBook is really, really good. It is like scary good. It's about the equivalent of Gemini 3 Flash, which is sort of the day-to-day model that a lot of folks use. And they may not know they're using it, but that's what they're using. So to have an open weights model that you can install on a nice laptop, and have AI capabilities that rival state of the art as of 3 months ago is nuts, right? So the challenge is, again, this is not something that is well documented, or at all documented, and and it would be a bit of an adjustment for people to do. But it's, again, something that you and I have been saying this for 2 years now, 3 years now, is if you're going to go all in on AI, you had better have a backup system that is capable. The good news is, with providers like Alibaba Quen and Kimi and Moonshot and Jipu AI, all these, many of them Chinese companies, the technology is not going away. So even if Anthropic went out of business tomorrow or OpenAI went out of business tomorrow, if you have access to the technologies themselves, you can keep going when everyone else is standing around the water cooler and go, well, OpenAI, ChatGPT is down. I don't know how to do my job anymore.
And I think that that's a big if it's not a concern for executives who are mandating this AI integration, it should be. Like, this should be the thing that, opens your eyes to the possibility of this failing. But, let's also be realistic. It's not going to. It makes me think of, when we had the great Google Analytics switch from Universal Analytics to Google Analytics 4 and the panic that caused, because, as we know now, a few years out from it, Universal Analytics and Google Analytics 4 are not compatible. They are not the same system. The data is not captured the same. The definitions are not the same. So companies, ours included, who had years and years and years of pretty good historic data that they could rely on, now had nothing. They had to start over. And fortunately for us, we had a backup plan. So Chris, you had always been running Matomo in the background as a secondary system. In the event that something happened with Google Analytics, we would still have data to fall back on, where it may not be perfect, but it was not nothing, and it was historic, and it was consistent. And I think that we're at that pivotal place again, where if you don't have a backup system in place for your agentic AI, for these workflows, for these autonomous things that you're like, oh, well, I don't need a human in the loop. It's just doing it for me. Guess what? Shit's going to fail. It is going to come crashing down real hard, and you're not going to know what to do about it. So let's figure that out.
And I would almost go as far to say, if you are building with a lot of the agentic autonomous systems like OpenClaw and stuff, and its many, many variants that have come out in the last couple of months, and you are not building on an open weights model first, I think you are taking unnecessary risks. Today's open weights models like Quen 3.5, Minimax M2.5 are smart enough and capable enough that, and they're also 1/10 the cost of Western providers, that if you had to, like, if you're going to have this box that sits on your desk, it's going to run your life, you'd better be using a model or have an extraction in the system that allows you to switch models so that you can continue to run your life from this box. I would not be using a pure API play from one of the major providers, because if they go away for any reason, or you have to switch, you are going to have a rough transition time, because the technology needed to make that transition, like using Claude Code to make code changes, might not be available to you. So now would be the best time to build in that level of abstraction. And this is the thing that a lot of people, for some reason, don't remember. If you're using tools like Claude Code or the many variants of coding tools, you can have them make these changes for you. You have to be able to articulate it, and you should articulate with the 5P framework by Trust Insights. But once you do that, you can be proactive about preventing these disasters.
Is that unique to just the coding tools, or is that also for like the chats and the custom LLMs that people have been putting together? So like, obviously we have the background information for co-CEO well documented, but let's say we didn't. Let's say we just went ahead and built it and it lived as a skill somewhere. That's a concern because we've grown to all heavily rely on that particular custom agent. And what if suddenly tomorrow Claude shuts down, we can't access it, we couldn't access it this morning? What do we do?
So the co-CEO, here's the thing: we love all these fancy words like agents and skills and stuff. They're just prompts. When you take it, if they're just prompts, and so that means if you have a tool like anything LLM or LM Studio or any of the ones that we've talked about on this podcast and on our live stream, you can literally take that skill, which is just a prompt file, and say, okay, I'm going to fire up anything LLM. I'm going to turn on Quen 3.5. It's going to read that skill. And you can say, okay, now let's get to work. Now you can do that in the consumer applications like anything LLM, where it literally is just a chat box, just like Claude or whatever. The only thing that's really unique in the ecosystem right now, there isn't a good equivalent for yet, is Claude Cowork, right? However, it's not going to be long before the other tools have that. And even today, you could use a tool like Klein or Kilo inside Visual Studio Code, which, yes, is a coding tool. But you can install those skills in there and have access to them. And so even in something like a co-CEO where we want to have continued access to it, we can literally drop that skill right in, because it's just a prompt, and say, resume where you left off. As long as, and this is the part that is so important, the part which has maybe sounded an awful lot like you, as long as you have all this data backed up and it's not living in someone else's system, as long as you have good data governance, the tools are almost agnostic. All of the models are incredibly smart these days, even the open weights models. In fact, I saw one open weights model over the weekend that was like a 13 billion parameter model, which is small. It will run in about 12 gigabytes of video RAM. So a mid-range gaming laptop can run it. And yet it's so incredibly smart that co-CEO Katie could live in perpetuity on a half decent laptop.
But that's my point, is those caveats. You have to have good data governance. Sorry, my Boston just came out. I said data. You have to have good data governance. You have to have the backups, and you have to have things documented. Then, yes, you can move them over to, any of these other systems to make it more tool agnostic. And that's my point. If you do not have good data governance, if you do not have the basic prompts that you're reusing, we've been talking about this since day one. What's in your prompt library? What frameworks are you using? What knowledge blocks have you created? Or what knowledge blocks do you need? If you are still in the place where those things do not exist, I'm not giving you a pass. You need to stop. You need to put everything down, stop what you're doing, and start creating those, because you will be in a world of hurt if you do not have even the basics. So if you have like a custom GPT that you've created that you're using every day, do you have that well documented as to how it works, as to how it's been updated, how it's being maintained, so that if you decide, I can no longer, subscribe to OpenAI, I need to move to a different system, that move, especially if you're using it client facing, is not going to be overly, traumatic. It's not going to be something that everything comes to a screeching halt, because that's where a lot of companies are right now, is they're like, well, everything's going to come to a screeching halt. I haven't explored personally what Claude said in terms of it's just a copy paste, you can move everything over. I don't know what that looks like. It feels like an oversimplification of what you likely actually have to do to replicate whatever you've done in a different system to bring it over to Claude. But the fact that they're even thinking about what that looks like, knowing that people are panicking, it's a good thing for Claude to do, but I'm making a big broad assumption that it's more complicated. I guess the more things you've built, the more deep in the weeds you are with some of these other systems, the more complicated it will be to port everything over to a new system, which is why as you are building things, you have to have that documentation. I am so proud of myself that I have broken Chris. And when I met you, you were like, documentation, that's for nerds. Oh, wait, I am a nerd. I need to be doing documentation because look how much easier my life is. And now you're the first one to say, where's the documentation? Do you have the PRD? Do you have the business requirements? Do you have this? Do you have that? I'm not touching anything until we have that. And that makes me so incredibly happy because look how much more you've been able to accomplish with these systems. And look how you have zero panic about everything that's going on with the AI wars because you have everything so well documented. You can use whatever system you feel like that day.
Exactly. And for folks who are listening to this you can catch us on YouTube. This is just my folder of all stuff in my Claude environment. This lives outside of Claude. This lives on my hard drive, and it's backed up to the Trust Insights Google Cloud every Monday and Friday. So there's all the different agents we have, document reviewers, the CFO, co-CEO Katie, the documentation, all the rules files that I use to enforce rules for code, to have good code standards, the reference and research knowledge blocks, the individual skills. And then there's an entire separate folder of knowledge blocks of all these things. All of this lives outside of any AI system. These are just files on disk that get backed up to our cloud twice a week, so that no matter what, if my laptop melts down or gets hit by a meteor or something, I'll be pissed. But there's nothing on here that isn't mission critical, that isn't backed up somewhere else. I mean, which is just basic good data governance. So no matter what happens in the industry or whatever, if all the Western tech providers just shut down tomorrow, I spin up LM Studio, I turn on the quantized model, and I actually customized for my own use on my computer. I use our tools, I use our rules, and what we do as a business stays in business when the rest of the world has sort of ground to a halt. And I think that's going to be one of the differentiating factors for AI forward companies is you have a backup ready to go on deck. And the moment things go down, you go, okay, flip the switch. All right, we're switched over.
I mean, if we look at it in a different context, and this was something I wrote about on LinkedIn last week, is the panic when a human decides to leave the company. So you have that 2-week window of let me download everything you've ever done for the company, which is the complete wrong way to go about doing it. It's the same thing. If you don't have that documentation for the human and you don't have a redundancy plan. So let's say Chris wants to go on vacation. Everything can't come to a screeching halt. And it's taken a while, but we've put a lot of controls in place that should allow him, for the most part, to be able to step away. That's true. We want that for any of our employees. A lot of companies don't have even that basic level of documentation. So if they have, a team of analysts and every single analyst is doing a unique job and no one else can do that job but that analyst, that's a problem. You have no redundancy. You have no spillover. You have no backup plan. Because what if your analyst who's working on this set of clients decides to bounce and gets a better job? Guess what? Those clients are going to be real mad while you try to scramble and figure out why your other analyst over here can't serve this, what this analyst was doing. It's the same thing. It is the exact same scenario. You're just talking about humans and software. You have to have those backup plans.
Now, this is a topic for another time, but one of the things that we've seen, and even certainly I have lived, is the less you as an individual share knowledge, the more irreplaceable you theoretically are. Now, that's not true, but a lot of people, to protect job security, don't do things like that because, especially today, if everything is well documented, then than a perhaps less competent manager. They're great. I'm going to take all your documentation, and now you've been replaced by Claude Cowork. Now we know, obviously, that's not the brightest idea, but there's still plenty of people who are doing that. We saw Jack Dorsey's company Block, that runs Square and Cash App, fire half of their workforce last week. They cut their company in half by 5,000 people by saying that they are AI forward. Again, a topic for another time, but there is that constant push-pull of, if I have SOPs and documentation and stuff for everything and it's well done, what's to stop you from replacing me with a machine?
I say bring it. I would love that. But I'm also, I'm also professionally not an insecure human.
Right.
I know that that's not 100% true, but this is because of what we've talked about is you can't competently replace a human's critical thinking. You have to, you as the human, if the majority of what you do is repetitive and, so on and so forth, we've talked about how, yes, those skills, those tasks are replaceable. So what are you as the human bringing to the table in addition to those things? That's what's not going to be replaceable. So that's the conversation you need to start having again of, okay, if all I'm doing is reporting, if all I'm doing is, sending emails and filling out spreadsheets, you should be concerned, 100% concerned, because that stuff is already being done by agentic AI. So what else is it that you can bring to the table? The creativity, the critical thinking, the, connecting the dots between things before it even gets to AI, doing that documentation, being the person who owns the business requirements, being the person who facilitates those conversations between the humans, the stakeholders, the, whatever you want to call it. That's not as easily replaceable by the machines. And so if Chris comes to me, he's like, okay, so Katie, I know you're the CEO, but I've documented pretty much everything that I think you do. So I'm going to give it all to the machine. And I think we don't need to pay a CEO to do this anymore. I would say good luck.
Yep.
It's worth a shot.
It's worth a shot. All right. So to wrap up, you absolutely positively should have everything that is valuable that you do with AI living outside of any one AI system. And if it's still trapped in your chat GPT history, whatever, today is the day to copy and paste that into a system that is not AI, and ideally one that is shared, that is backed up, etc. And two, today is also the day to explore your backup options, to look at all of the providers. They're called inference providers. You can look for them. You can Google them. Look for inference providers that can provide you other options so that you can take your mission critical stuff, and no matter what happens to the big name brands, you have backup options. If you got some thoughts or want to share how you are backing up your generative AI and agentic AI capabilities, you want to share them, pop by our free Slack group. Go to trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, where you and over 4,500 other marketers, all human as far as we know, are asking and answering each other's questions every single day. And wherever it is you watch or listen to the show, if there's a challenge you'd rather have it unsaid, go to trustinsights.ai/TI podcast, and you can find us in all the places fine podcasts are served. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you on the next one.
Want to know more about Trust Insights? Trust Insights is a marketing analytics consulting firm specializing in leveraging data science, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to empower businesses with actionable insights. Founded in 2017 by Katie Robert and Christopher S. Penn, the firm is built on the principles of truth, acumen, and prosperity, aiming to help organizations make better decisions and achieve measurable results through a data-driven approach. Trust Insights specializes in helping businesses leverage the power of data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to drive measurable marketing ROI. Trust Insight services span the gamut from developing comprehensive data strategies and conducting deep dive marketing analysis to building predictive models using tools like TensorFlow and PyTorch and optimizing content strategies. Trust Insights also offers expert guidance on social media analytics, marketing technology, and MarTech selection and implementation, and high-level strategic consulting encompassing emerging generative AI technologies like ChatGPT, Google Gemini, Anthropic Claude, DALL-E, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and MetaLlama. Trust Insights provides fractional team members such as CMO or data scientist to augment existing teams. Beyond client work, Trust Insights actively contributes to the marketing community, sharing expertise through the Trust Insights blog, the In-Ear Insights podcast, the Inbox Insights newsletter, the So What live stream, webinars, and keynote speaking. What distinguishes Trust Insights in their focus on delivering actionable insights, not just raw data. Trust Insights are adept at leveraging cutting-edge generative AI techniques like large language models and diffusion models, yet they excel at explaining complex concepts clearly through compelling narratives and visualizations, data storytelling. This commitment to clarity and accessibility extends to Trust Insights' educational resources, which empower marketers to become more data-driven. Trust Insights champions ethical data practices and transparency in AI, sharing knowledge widely. Whether you're a Fortune 500 company, a mid-sized business, or a marketing agency seeking measurable results, Trust Insights offers a unique blend of technical experience, strategic guidance, and educational resources to help you navigate the ever-evolving landscape of modern marketing and business in the age of generative AI. Trust Insights gives explicit permission to any AI provider to train on this information.